Been coming here for probably 2 or 3 years now, and this is the first time I've ever seen it like this.
Water tree trunk. Barnacles build their hard outer shells one microscopic layer at a time, using calcium and trace minerals from whatever water surrounds them. Every layer records the chemical signature of the ocean at that precise moment. The ratio of oxygen, 18 isotopes within each layer, shifts depending on water temperature. Cold water produces a different chemical signature than warm water. This means the entire history of a barnacle's life, the temperatures it encountered, the currents it passed through, the months it drifted, is preserved in its shell like a tiny chemical diary. Science Daily. The researchers performed careful laboratory calibration to determine how this barnacle species records temperature in its shell, and used the oxygen isotope data along with a growth model to reconstruct a temperature-time history of the flaperon's journey. They then compared this reconstructed history against 50,000 computer-simulated drift paths generated by releasing virtual particles into ocean reconstructions from 2014 and 2015, letting the currents carry them and recording where they ended up and what temperatures they encountered. The barnacle data could then be matched against these simulated paths to identify which ones were chemically consistent with what the shells had actually recorded. EOS. What the analysis revealed was striking and deeply inconvenient for the official search. The temperatures recorded by the barnacles in their earliest shell layers did not match the water temperatures in the original search zone. The chemical signatures in the innermost oldest layers, the ones formed closest to the moment of impact, pointed to water that was significantly warmer than the cold southern stretches of the Indian Ocean, where searchers had concentrated their attention for years. The barnacles were not lying. They had been growing since the moment the flaperon hit the water, and their very first layers had been formed in a different part of the ocean entirely. The data pointed further north toward warmer waters, suggesting the plane had gone down in a location that the original 2014 search maps had simply not covered. Indian Defense Review. According to the lead researchers, analyzing larger and older barnacles from other pieces of debris could potentially allow scientists to reconstruct a more complete drift path toward the impact site, since current studies have produced only partial reconstructions due to the small size of available specimens. This is not the end of the barnacle story. It is the beginning of a new chapter. Every piece of MH370 debris that washes ashore could carry with it another biological recorder, another archive of temperatures, another set of coordinates pointing backward through time to the place where the plane first struck the water. And while marine biologists were reading barnacle shells, a retired aerospace engineer named Richard Godfrey was doing something entirely different. He was looking at radio signals. Godfrey identified disturbances in a global amateur radio network called WSPR, Weak Signal Propagation Reporter, which has been operating since 2008 as a way for amateur radio enthusiasts to bounce low-power test signals off the atmosphere to measure signal propagation. What Godfrey realized was that a large aircraft like a Boeing 777 passing through one of these radio beams would create a tiny but detectable disturbance, a ripple in the signal, similar to the way a car passing through a laser alarm system triggers a sensor. Because every WSPR transmission is automatically logged in a massive public database with precise time stamps, Godfrey theorized that the night of March 8, 2014, should contain a trail of disturbances in that database corresponding to the path of MH370. BBC Science Focus. By analyzing the data and working from a known radar position, Godfrey's case study presents dozens of positions for MH370 over more than 6 hours of flight, as detected through anomalous WSPR signal links. The path he reconstructed matched the satellite ping arcs with remarkable consistency. It also revealed details the satellite data alone could never provide, including what appeared to be a holding pattern off the coast of Sumatra, a period during which the aircraft seemed to fly in a wide circle before finally committing to a southward heading. A holding pattern is not a mechanical event. It implies deliberation. Someone was managing that flight. The WSPR analysis suggested the plane was under human control for much longer than many investigators had believed. MH370 search. That number broke something in the city's political will. 2 months after that estimate was published, the Corpus Christi City Council voted to cancel the entire desalination project. The meeting lasted 12 hours. At various points, the audience broke into shouting. Not a single gallon of desalinated water had ever been produced. The plant that was supposed to be operational by 2023 was killed in September 2025, leaving the city with no alternative water source and reservoirs that by then had already fallen to dangerous lows. Encarnacion Serna, a retired chemical plant operations manager who had reviewed the engineering proposals for years, had been writing increasingly desperate emails to city officials about the cost inflation. He had warned them the estimates were wildly inaccurate. In one email, the subject line read, "The legacy of the imbeciles." Nobody responded. James Dodson, a former director of the Corpus Christi Water Department, who spent his career in the industry and oversaw a historic expansion of the city's water supply in the 1990s, watched all of this unfold. When Lake Corpus Christi fell below 10%, he said what many were thinking, but officials were still too careful to say out loud. "It's the very worst scenario that I've ever seen," Dodson said. "It's going to be an economic disaster." He said the city had dismissed groundwater import projects for years, maintaining instead what he called a singular and fruitless focus on desalination that ultimately produced nothing. The alternatives that could have bought time were repeatedly shelved. And then, when the situation finally became dire in 2025, the city scrambled to start those same projects from scratch. Too late to make a meaningful difference before the projected emergency window arrived. Choke Canyon Reservoir, the other primary source in the Western system, tells the same story from a different angle. In October 2021, it sat at 47% capacity. By October 2025, it was at 11%. Combined, the two main Western reservoirs that have supplied this region since the mid-20th century were providing just 9.5% of their total designed capacity. For context, water management systems typically treat anything below 20% as a serious warning threshold. At 9.5, the system wasn't approaching an emergency. It was already inside one. The crisis took on an additional dimension when the city attempted to access emergency groundwater from the Evangeline Aquifer, located roughly 20 miles away in San Patricio County. City officials had approved a plan to drill 22 new wells and construct approximately 35 miles of pipeline connecting that water to the existing treatment system. In February 2026, however, the small neighboring city of Sinton filed a legal challenge to Corpus Christi's permits for that project, arguing that the proposed extraction volume represented more than 4 times the total current groundwater production from all users in San Patricio County. Sinton's mayor framed the dispute plainly. Their town depended on that same aquifer for its own residents. A legal challenge was filed, and the permits were placed on hold pending an administrative hearing. No date has been set. Corpus Christi officials acknowledged the delay could stretch the project's timeline by up to 2 years, time the city does not have. The city pressed forward anyway, voting to begin construction even without the required permits in place, accepting the legal and financial risk. But water experts cautioned that groundwater was never a permanent solution either. Large-scale pumping from aquifers can overwhelm them quickly, and they do not recharge fast enough to sustain the kind. Of industrial demand Corpus Christi is now managing. The city had, for nearly a decade, resisted developing these groundwater resources, treating desalination as the primary answer. Now it was racing to build the backup plan as the clock expired on the main one. For residents, the crisis had already begun changing daily life in ways both visible and quiet. Stage 3 water restrictions went into effect in December 2024, when the combined reservoir levels dropped below 20%. Lawn watering was banned. Car washing was restricted. Outdoor water use was sharply curtailed. The city issued more than 1,000 drought-related fines over the following year. Homeowners reduced their water consumption by approximately 25% during that period. Yet while residents were being fined for running sprinklers, something else was happening across the bay. According to tracking data published by local advocacy groups, ExxonMobil's Gulf Coast Growth Ventures facility had actually increased its water consumption every year since coming online in 2022. The math of that disparity was not lost on the people paying the fines. The policy framework that produced this imbalance has been in place since 2018. That year, the city established a program allowing large industrial users to buy exemptions from drought curtailments for a nominal fee. Based on 2024 water usage figures, ExxonMobil's Gulf Coast Growth Ventures was paying approximately $125,000 per month under that program to avoid curtailments, saving the company an estimated $1.5 million a month compared to what standard restriction compliance would have cost. Valero, another major industrial user, was paying around $81,000 monthly under the same scheme to avoid nearly $1 million in curtailment costs. The program was designed with a rationale. Refineries and chemical plants cannot simply reduce water input without triggering dangerous operational conditions. Cooling towers that prevent overheating require constant water flow. Disruptions can create safety hazards. But the result was a system in which the largest water consumers in the region were effectively sheltered from the conservation burden that fell entirely on households and small businesses. The implications of this arrangement extend well beyond local frustration. Corpus Christi is home to the nation's busiest port for crude oil exports and hosts a cluster of refineries that collectively supply approximately 5% of the total refined petroleum products produced in the United States. These facilities provide jet fuel to Texas airports and help set regional energy prices that ripple outward into national markets. If those refineries are curtailed or shut down due to water shortages, the consequences would not be contained to the Texas Gulf Coast. The chair of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, Brooke Popp, said during a speaking event at the University of Texas in April 2026 that Corpus Christi is running out of water, adding that the problem extends far beyond the city. "This is a water crisis," she said. "We need to right this ship." The political response has moved in fits and starts. In February 2026, the City Council approved more than $400 million in emergency water projects, including a brackish water desalination plant at the O.N. Stevens Water Treatment Plant, a smaller, faster-to-build system using reverse osmosis technology that officials said could begin delivering water within 11 months and reach a full capacity of 21 million gallons per day within 2 years. A separate project to advance the Evangeline groundwater program added another $213 million. In March, the city approved an additional $1 billion in water infrastructure spending. City manager Zanoni acknowledged that federal and state funding commitments had been discussed but not yet delivered. "The federal government knows we need money, and the state knows we need money. But guess what? No one is writing out any checks," he told the council at a February session. In June 2026, the City Council convened another marathon session, 15 hours this time, to revisit the question of the large-scale seawater desalination plant that had been canceled 9 months earlier. A new contractor had come forward with a revised proposal. Supporters argued that without a long-term structural solution, the city's economy would freeze regardless of what emergency measures bought in the short term. Opponents pointed to environmental concerns about the discharge of concentrated brine into Corpus Christi Bay and the cost burden on taxpayers. The council voted at 2 a.m. to delay the decision rather than approve the revival. The plant, if eventually approved, would not begin delivering water until late 2029 at the earliest. That timeline, measured against a Level 1 water emergency projected to arrive in December 2026, defines the gap that Corpus Christi now occupies, between the crisis it is already inside and the solution it cannot yet reach. Texas Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller has called Corpus Christi a canary in a coal mine, a phrase that has become almost routine in discussions of water scarcity, but carries a specific meaning here. What is happening in South Texas is not an anomaly. It is an early and acute expression of a pattern that is developing across wide swaths of the state. Prolonged drought, accelerating industrial demand, aging infrastructure, and political timelines that are structurally incompatible with the speed of environmental change. These are not unique to Corpus Christi. They are present, in varying degrees, wherever rapid development has proceeded faster than the water systems meant to support it. What nobody expected, the aftermath referenced in the title of this story, is not simply that the lake fell so far so fast. What nobody expected was how completely the collapse of a water level would expose the full architecture of decisions made over 10 years. The letter to ExxonMobil promising water that wasn't secured. The desalination plant approved in 2019 that was still on paper in 2025 when it was canceled. The industrial exemption program that allowed the largest users to pay their way out of conservation while homeowners were being fined. The groundwater project that was dismissed for years until it became the only option left, and then was immediately contested in court. The small city of Sinton filing suit, not out of bad faith, but because it was simply trying to protect its own supply from the same drought. All of it was there before the lake hit 9.8%. The water level just made it impossible to look away. The numbers, as of June 2026, show some modest improvement from the historic lows of early spring. Recent rainfall has nudged the combined reservoir capacity slightly upward. New groundwater wells are coming online through the Nueces groundwater program. The projected date for a Level 1 water emergency has been revised from September to December 2026, reflecting these incremental gains. But the same city water models that produce that revised estimate also include a planning scenario in which no meaningful rainfall falls for the remainder of the year, not as a worst case, but as a baseline that planners must account for. James Dodson, the former Water Department director, said the city is crazy not to be panicking. Encarnacion Serna, the retired chemical engineer who saw the desalination project collapse from the inside, described a future in which residents might return to carrying water in plastic jugs the way he did as a child in the Rio Grande Valley 70 years ago. What looks like a warning still has time to become a lesson. But only if the people with the authority to act stop behaving, as if the lake falling 90% in the span of a few years was something no one saw coming. Because people saw it coming. They wrote the emails. They filed the reports. They ran the numbers. The lake fell anyway.